Welcome to the Bestiary, your one-stop shop for monster lore, info, and shenanigans. Join us as we take you through today's special feature.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Bestiary. My name is Morganite and I'm going to be running the Twitch side of things today. And I'm here with our wonderful DM, Jonathan.
Hello, I'm wonderful.
And our fabulous fellow player, Kayvon.
Hey.
And our special guest today is Shannon Applecline.
Yeah, I wrote the 4-book series Designers and Dragons, which is out from Evil Hat right now.
And I've got my copy of the first one right here. The rest of the volumes are sitting on my bookshelf, prominently displayed. When we started the Bestiary, I started digging into obviously a lot of history for Dungeons and Dragons and for the RPG genre in general, and discovered that it's this very unique, cool history. A mix of sort of hobbyists and people of passion coming together to build this entire industry that almost seems like it survived just based on luck. And I knew that there was a deeper story there, and but that story wasn't. I couldn't find it told anywhere until I stumbled upon Shannon's books, and I've been sucked into these. They're a 4-volume set. Each one's over 300 pages. I just don't think there's another book series out there like this for the genre.
Thank you.
And Shannon, I wanted to start by asking you actually, what inspired you to write Designers and Dragons?
I was inspired by a company that was short-lived called Imperium Publishing, I think. They were out in the 90s, and they were the ones who started publishing Traveller after GDW went under, as many companies did in the 90s. This was a company, I'd always loved Traveller. They were my, second or third love among gaming. And I started picking up these new supplements for Traveller 4, T4 as it was called. They frankly weren't very good, but they were the only things out. And then I started working for Chaosium. And one thing that viewers may not realize is that when you work for a role-playing company, you stop having any money. And I literally made the least money I did in my entire life. I think I may have made more money when I was demoing things in grocery stores in high school. And since I didn't have any money, I couldn't afford the Traveller books anymore. And I worked for Chaosium for about 2 years. And when I finished up with them, no one was making these books anymore. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but 10 years later or so, I was looking at my shelf, which had this truncated set of books. I'd never gotten the last 6 or 7 publications. I asked myself, what happened to that company? And so I started researching it, just, because it was, 11 o'clock at night, I was bored and the internet was there. So, why not start figuring out what's going on with this company? And I started writing an index, which ended up on RPGNet, which allowed me to list out everything that people had published. We've got, several tens of thousands of products there. And I eventually started to get the story. And it was a scandalous story, not all of which actually went into the books, because some of the most scandalous things, like people potentially stealing money from the company, couldn't be collaborated sufficiently to put something that spurious in writing.
Wow.
And I eventually found out that, basically Mark Miller had given rights to this game to a person who was, very big on what he could do and had more troubles actually doing so. And it was all tied up with Sweet Pea Entertainment, who at the time had the rights for Dungeons and Dragons movies. And it was just this really intriguing story. So I got done with that and I wrote it up. And I sat on it for a while because of the things I wasn't sure if I could actually say or not until I could talk to some people. And I said, hey, that was kind of cool. I liked the research. I liked finding out what was going on. I liked writing about it. And I liked having this, document when I was done. And so then I went and I wrote one for Chaosium, who was the company that I worked for and I really loved throughout high school and college days. And then I said, hey, maybe I should write one for Wizards of the Coast now because they own D&D. And that one I actually published on RPGNet. And I got good feedback from it. And I kept publishing more and more. And people started saying, hey, can we publish this as a book? And so we started publishing it as a book. And Evil Hat is the one who's done a great job of the current edition, which is in 4 volumes and covers about 100 companies.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating for those who want to read it, who have an interest in the history of this stuff. It is the minutia. I don't think, again, it's easy to find anywhere else. I mean, it is, like you said, there's 100 other little companies that I didn't realize were really having an impact.
When you're doing your research, do you interview people that were key players in these companies, or do you look for like archival documents, or how do you go back and actually dive through this history?
If I can find someone with the company who will answer questions, I ask them. And so I've been looking at a company called The Companions, who did a lot of really high quality adventures in the 1980s, very evocative, story oriented, the sort of thing that you didn't see a lot of at the time. And one of the principals of that company, Peter Rice, has been great about answering questions for me. And so that was one where there was so little in the original sources that I had to ask lots of things. Why did you do this? How did this work out? And wow, I found some great weird connections to the industry. Like he bought the mail order company of the person who originally hired Gary Gygax to do gaming and publish Chainmail. And usually after that, I put together a actual history, and then whether I have talked to someone from the company or not at that point, I then do try and find someone from the company, send it to them and say, hey, what did I screw up here? And sometimes I get, I can't believe you figured out how all that fit together. And sometimes I get, I can't believe that you have this view of things, you need to change it. And hopefully from that iterative process that focuses as much as possible on the early sources, but also uses other sources as required, I get something that's pretty decent.
Well, and speaking of the history and things changing, today's topic is one of the creatures that has kind of ridden the wave with Dungeons and Dragons rise and fall. They've been there in rumor since the early days, and then made quite the splash when they finally appeared, and now are considered one of the, I'd say, iconic, really symbols of the game. And that is the Dark Elves, which are known as the Drow, or sometimes the Drow. We'll get into that soon, but my first question for you, I'm going to say Drow because that's how I've said it my whole life. But Shannon, why did you pick the Drow for today's topic?
Well, honestly, I was shocked that no one had picked the Drow before, because as far as I'm concerned, they are pretty much the iconic D&D monster. I mean, they're not a dragon, but if you look at something that was actually created within the context of the game itself, which is what I was interested in as a historian, I can't think of much that'd be more exciting. I mean, Beholder, they're kind of neat visually. Mind Flayer, they have kind of cool Lovecraftian undertones, but I just don't think there's anything else that's been not just created, but evolved and built upon over decades as the Drow, and seen from a lot of viewpoints too.
And one of the things that we've already talked about is this Drow bit. What is the word on pronouncing this name?
Well, lucky for you, in Dragon Magazine number 93, Gary Gygax wrote up a pronunciation guide for a lot of the harder to pronounce words in the D&D lexicon, and he said how to pronounce Drow, and it helpfully says, Drow. It lists out the word, and it says Drow. Ardro.
Was that Gygax or was that Frank Menser? I thought Frank Menser's the who's credited for writing that.
I think you might be right. It might be Menser.
Yeah.
So it turned out to be pretty unhelpful because he gave both pronunciations, and
he didn't want to stay on the line on a particular version, apparently.
Yeah. And this is a pronunciation question that had resulted in fights in my high school group. So,
where did you fall? What was your chosen?
I think it was usually Drow, but it's hard to say. I'm somewhat of a language chameleon, and so if someone said Drow long enough after I'd said Drow, I probably would have changed it over. Though I think I was one of those people fighting in my high school group just because that's what we did.
I feel like part of the argument also comes from Ed Greenwood, which is he clearly stated that it was cow, not show. Rhymes with cow, not show in his work, Dark Warrior Rising. Though that was many years after the debate originally started. But I feel like that added fire to the conflict, perhaps having someone of his authority come out clearly on one line of the argument.
Well, I suppose a good question would be how it's pronounced in the audiobooks, because I'm sure there must be audiobooks of the Drizzt novels.
It is Drow in the audiobooks, because I have recently gone in. I actually missed the Drizzt novels when I was a child, and so more recently have gone back to listen to them. And the audiobooks are actually really good. The guy does a lot of different voices and is very good at them. And he has a nice, somber, tragic, sad, melancholy tone for Drizzt. And of course, Drizzt himself was a question of pronunciation for years as well, I believe. It was like Drizzit and Drizzt, and
that's how me and my high school group pronounced it. Yeah, it was Drizzit. Mm-hmm.
And I guess I should give a bit of an introduction because not everybody who listens to us knows Dungeons and Dragons as well. Very briefly, the Drow are Dark Elves. You've all heard of Dark Elves, and the Drow really started that amongst pretty much the entire fantasy genre, I believe. I think they were the first ones to really actually create this race of evil elves, aside from maybe Tolkien's thoughts on orcs having come from elves and all that. But there's a really fascinating way that they entered the scene. I guess we could start there because originally, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Shannon, but as I understand it, the Dark Elves were sort of this rumor in the game. Like Gygax had they'd been mentioned here and there, but they didn't actually have stats. They didn't exist. Is that correct?
Well, the first time you'll find a reference to them, as far as I know, is in the original Monster Manual, 1977 for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And if you look at the entry for elves there, it says there's also Dark Elves. I think it uses the word Drow, but they're just legendary.
Right.
Clearly, he was thinking about it already at that time, but no stats, and in fact, he says they don't exist.
And then you come to, I believe it's 1978 was the first module, G1, the attack against the giants, or the what was it? The hill giant chief, the steadfast of the hill.
Steading of the hill giant chief is the first one. Though every time I look at it, I think he's the hill giant chef.
And there is actually a thing about food cooking in that module, a very memorable scene. But in 1978, this module comes out, and it's a battle against giants. Really, it's just it all involves the giants. But the players can they find these little clues that the Dark Elves are involved, and then the next series in this was the D series, which is the Descent into the Depths of the Earth, where it is fully revealed, right, that the Dark Elves exist, they're there, and we delve into the Underdark for the first time. And then that leads to the Q series, which starts with Queen of the Demon Web Pits, where you discover that the Drow worship this demonic goddess named Lolth. Well, I guess there's a battle of religion, actually. Some of the Drow are worshiping, is it Therisdun, the elemental evil? The Elder Eye?
Tharzadun is actually a late-day hypocrisy.
Gotcha.
Not hypocrisy. it's apocryphal to a lot of old school fans. In the original adventures, the Elder Elemental God is the only name that you see, and that's who's worshipped by the Drow, who spend most of their time in the spotlight in the G&D modules, and they are certainly going up against the worshippers of Loth, who are the normative Drow in society.
And we've talked about Loth in a prior podcast. If you guys go back and listen to the giant spider bestiary episode, we go into the whole history of Loth there. But the reason that I bring this all up is this GDQ series was the way of introducing the Drow to the world, the gamers of Dungeons and Dragons. And that fascinates me just as a creative choice, that like you build up this legend, this rumor, you build it up both in game and in real life. And then simultaneously it becomes real in real life, as far as stats and all that go, but also real for the game world as people, the adventurers discover, oh my God, there's this Underdark. And I was curious, Shannon, if you have any insight into what that was like for a gamer in those days, or what sort of historical, like, was that unprecedented? Was that, everything might have been unprecedented back then.
Yeah. I couldn't say that I had insight into what it was like for a gamer, because I wasn't a gamer yet. I got my first D&D set in 1982, a nice basic set. But was it unprecedented? Yes, absolutely it was unprecedented. But part of the reason it was unprecedented was the first adventure module TSR ever put out was G1 steading of the hill giant chief. And so they'd never seen anything like that before. But it was also a tournament. The Giants Adventures were run at Argent 78, and the Descent Adventures were run at Gen Con 11, I think, a month later. And people had seen tournament adventures before. But one of the big changes in tournament adventures in 1978 was these were some of the first multi-round tournament adventures. D&D, of course, got started in 1974. The first tournaments that were at a very large scale were run in 1975. I think that was when the first one was at Argents. Yeah, that was the first Argents. And a lot of them were one-round tournaments at the time. So one of the things that you have happening in 1978 is you have this 3-round tournament, which isn't how things were done very much previously. And this was by the by because you just had this hugely increasing number of people, and you got to the point where the people running the tournaments were saying, I can't tell who the best person is from a single round. So with a 3-round tournament, one of the things you have to say is, how do we connect this up? And I think that might be where part of the story of the Drow came from. Obviously you have the Giants tournaments connected up. They were the first ones by saying, hey, here's 3 different types of giants. We're going to fight the Hill Giants, and we're going to fight the Frost Giants, and we're going to fight the Fire Giants. But if you had the subplot, you could make it a little more interesting. And I think in particular what was happening is TSR ran the events fairly directly at Argents. They had ones in 75, 76, and 78, all of which became adventure modules. Over at Gen Con, you had the official AD&D tournaments, but they were being run by Bob Blake, who was a star of the early industry there at the time. And there wasn't quite the same direct TSR connection, as you can see by the fact that none of the previous ones were turned into official modules. And so this might have also been a way to say, hey, you really liked these Argents tournaments? We're going to do more of them at Gen Con, and they're still directly connected. And so what you had this massive 6-part story run across 2 months at 2 different cities in the Midwest over the course of the summer of 1978. And again, that was something that was never done before. The other way I'd say it was really unprecedented is if someone did what they did in the Giants Adventures in published books 20 years later, you'd say that's metaplot. And in fact, if you look at like what White Wolf was doing in the late 90s, the early aughts, they did exactly this type of thing. As I recall, they had one point where they were starting to introduce demons into their setting, and they kind of hinted at them for a while. I don't know, maybe they introduced one, and then they finally came out with the demon, the whatever the subtitle was. And so it was the exact type of buildup as we saw in the Giants and Descent adventures, except, White Wolf was considered very storytelling oriented, very new school.
Right.
And the Giant and Descent adventures are the, oldest school of the old school that you can find there. And so I think in that way, Gygax was innovating something that the rest of the industry wouldn't get around to for 10 or 20 years later.
Wow. Okay. As far as from there, like, why do you think the Drow then just took off? Like, what exploded them onto the scene?
A lot of D&D at the time, you had monsters in rooms. I've heard some descriptions that in general, Gygax was doing a little more than that, and I think you can see that throughout the G&D adventures in general, and that he was creating monsters who really lived in their own environment and had lives outside of the actual adventure where they were just monsters to be fought. I've heard that called Gygaxian naturalism by James Malazewski over at his blog, and I think it's a very accurate description. And, the Giants, they were having a feast. As you said, stuff was cooking and steading. I don't know if there was as much liveliness in the others that really felt like an actual environment. But it felt like Gygax really turned that up to the next level in the Descent adventures, particularly in Shrine of the Kuo-toa and then in Vault of the Drow. Both of which really offered up societies of people, cities where they went about and did things. So the Drow, as they were seen in Vault, they, I think they were described like no one else ever had been in a role-playing adventure. And so that immediately caught people's attention. Beyond that, they were a unique demi-human race. They were not directly drawn from any other source. You could look at the halflings and say, hey, those are hobbits, which was much more clear in the day. You could look at elves and you could say, yeah, these are Tolkien elves. But the Drow, I mean, they were very original. And I don't know that really they blew up and exploded as much just from Gygax's original. I mean, you don't see a lot of use of them for a few years after that. I think Unearthed Arcana was the next book that really made strong use of them. And then, of course, you had Bob Salvador's Dritz Dord. But I think really it's the fact that they were original, that they had this society that was so well described. They felt like real things in a way that a lot of stuff, they didn't feel just like a game.
Right. And they become a player race pretty quickly, right?
Yes.
It's like 1985.
That was Unearthed Arcana.
Okay.
Yeah. And when they became a player race, they were, I think, a very popular player race. They certainly were in the groups I was playing with. And that's because they were kind of munchkin. They could always fight with... they could always fight with two weapons, which I don't know if that was really adequately balanced in AD&D.
It wasn't. It really wasn't.
Feels like cheating.
Yeah, it was a little bit. They didn't have the full magical resistance that the original Monstrous Drow had, but they still got a +2 on saving throws against all magic. They still got a lot of the elven advantages. My player in my group who was the biggest munchkin of them all, who I famously remember demanding to play a quickling at one time who was not a player race. He also played a double scimitar wielding Drow in the late 80s sometime.
Very dritzed of him.
Yes.
Before we go on to, I do want to talk about Dritz, but I wanted to throw it to Morgan, Kayvon, or the chat, see if there's anything you guys want to bring up on this topic.
Well, Stalker made a comment that I also thought of too, that the Dark Elves may have also been inspired by Norse mythology, because there is a race in Norse mythology that's, and I'm going to butcher this horribly because I haven't heard it pronounced correctly, is Svartalfar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. The dusky dark elf, murky elf. Yeah.
Black elves, Farthy elves, dusky elves, murky elves. Like, yeah, they've got a whole bunch of, but they were in the Prose Edda, which was in the 13th century. So there has been in the back of our conscience, like with as far as storytelling goes, this knowledge of some underground dark-skinned beings of some sort. But it does seem to kind of be inconsistent in that they may be elves or they may be dwarves. Like I don't
even.
Your gnomes.
Yeah. So but the term translates to dark elves. So that phraseology has been in our society for a long time.
Gygax himself claimed that he got the word Drow from maybe Knightley's fairy mythology, maybe a collection of folklore that got put together in the 1800s called the Secret Commonwealth, maybe from an expurgated dictionary of Anglo-Saxon words. A lot of fans and researchers have none of these actually exist in any of these sources. And some fans and researchers have said, hey, maybe this drow is connected to trow, which is a Scottish word from the Shetland Islands or from the Orkneys, and sounds like it itself was a corruption of troll, which fits because the trow were metalworking dwarves. But I've always liked the Norse origin myself, because the Dark Elves of Norse mythology, the Sword Elf and whatever they are, they feel very close to the Drow to me. A lot of the same casual cruelty. I'm going to show my own pop culture reference when I say the Thor comics from Marvel. They've done a tremendous job of showing the Dark Elves of Norse mythology over the years, and I look at them and I think, yep, those are slightly different Drow. They, live off in the 9 realms instead of underground, but otherwise they felt very close to me. So I think they're right that that's a very great origin for it, even if it's not what Gygax actually said. But what Gygax said were things that some he said in the 80s, some he said much later, and no one's ever been able to trace any of them.
Yeah, a point that we've brought up in the past, but when doing the a little more research on the Drow this round, just became so clear is the how D&D has really breathed life into ancient mythology. Like you have this Norse mythology, which some people may or may not know about. It's referenced in Thor here and there, but from that. We have a culture, religion, history, heroes that have been birthed through both the community, but also through the source material itself. And like time and time again, sort of as we dive into with the bestiary, different monsters and different creatures, like that keeps being like a reoccurrence theme of just like taking nuggets from history and creating something, fleshing it out in a way that otherwise wouldn't exist without this body of work, which is, I know, really my favorite, one of my favorite parts of D&D and lore and mythology within the world.
That's fascinating, because what you say there is really true. Like if we think about Dritz, for instance, Dritz Duorden, who, for like the two people who don't know, Dritz is a drow that reforms. He becomes good and he lives on the surface, which is anathema to the drow because sunlight hurts them. And he becomes like the savior of the Forgotten Realms time and time again. But is always dealing with this sort of the xenophobia of other races, the earned xenophobia because he comes from an evil race. Morgan's just put up a wonderful picture of him with his cat, whose name I cannot remember, the panther.
Yeah, this is the cover to one of the early books in the series, or at least when they redid the covers not too long ago.
Yeah, it's Gwynuhyver or something like that is the panther.
Oh yeah, right. But what Kayvon's saying, that is really interesting, because you have Dritz is sort of a modern day legend, a legend of the fantasy fans in our time, but does, as you say, I mean, Dark Elf. So you could almost say that is a taking of old legends, old mythology, and bringing them into the modern era and saying, we still have heroes of this race. We still have heroes of this mythology. That is really fascinating. Not everybody may be aware, the Drow are a matriarchal society, and the males of the society are also sort of trained to think of themselves as the lesser and naturally serving.
Yeah, within
women.
the religion only. On rare occasion, there'll be a male cleric or or a priest, but it's almost entirely female clerics. And since the worship of the Spider Queen comes above all else, that inherently leads to a matriarchal society. Yeah.
To get a little bit into their culture and society, the race lives underground in these gigantic underground cities. The greatest of which I cannot pronounce the name. Menzo Baranzan?
Seems to be common.
Is that it? Menzo Baranzan? But in any case, the Drow, they are ruled by matriarchs, certainly in the Forgotten Realms and in most modern interpretations of them. And the matriarchs are priestesses of Lolth, and everything is set up in these houses. And each house is ruled by a house mother, and the houses war with each other constantly. And one of my favorite parts about this culture as it's described is that it's known and expected that the houses are going to war and assassinate and kill each other, but you're supposed to do it very quietly and cleverly. And if you don't do it quietly and cleverly, you're looked down upon, and the other houses might even band against you and destroy you, stamp you out. But if it just so happens that the house mother dies and her daughter mysteriously rises to the head of that house, and then somehow along the way, this other house that was doing pretty good suddenly goes down too, everybody's like, well, no, that's great. That's we're going to support this.
It was like a cult of assassins, essentially, with how it was kind of run there.
And Kayvon, me and you have had conversation before the show a little bit, and you brought up an interesting point I wanted to dive into, because you were saying you were talking about like are the Drow inherently evil?
Yeah, well, the conversation about them being presented as like an evil race, but really it feels more like they're socialized into being evil based on their religious beliefs. Effectively all Drow follow Lolth, and her whole her court is effectively just the strongest win, only the strong survive. Stab your way to the top. And this sort of, anyone who disagrees is literally killed. So anyone who doesn't follow that line, any child who shows kindness is murdered. Anyone who fails her test is turned into a giant spider creature and banished, or like a weird spider head creature. Like there's a couple of these weird.
The Drider.
Yeah, there's a couple
yeah.
of these things. There's like the Drider, the Chiwadensha, which is another one of these sort of like spider-legged horror creature things. A Shund, which is like a weird like bobbly. It was just like a whole bunch of these really messed up abominations that you get turned into if you fail the test of the Spider Queen. So it's really like through fear and coercion, they're forced to maintain like they self-regulate an evil demeanor, and anyone who is ostracized if they don't follow suit. So yes, they're presented as evil, and like their culture is pretty violent and aggressive. But also, it's to say that if you were to pull a baby Drow out and raise it on this, in some sort of more loving condition, that they would be vicious, I think is maybe not true.
Yeah, that falls into the whole nature versus nurture argument, because that's all they know and are exposed to. How else are they supposed to exist if they want to survive? They have really no choice. Drizzt got lucky in the sense that he was able to get out, and that's not the case across the board.
You also have like selective breeding of like the most aggressive and most vicious generational over and over and over again to sort of reinforce these traits. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
A lot of the other histories of the Drow that have appeared since Gygax is they seem to take the opposite tack, where Gygax said these were cruel and selfish elves who were driven into the Underdark, and there they found Lolth. The other ones say they were worshipping Lolth above ground and were driven down to the Underdark as a result. And so I think you could say that one maybe that one's nurture, because those ones, they're not implicitly cruel and selfish. They've just found Loth for whatever reason and been lured in. So I think that's something that kind of was an evolution of the race from Gygax to the other people who were writing about them.
Do you feel that added more depth to the characters, or do you sort of prefer the more black and white world of the old days of RPGs, where giants were stupid and they were giants, and the Drow were evil and they were dark elves?
Obviously, it added depth. I mean, you have more depth if you have conflict within society. All evil is just as uninteresting as all good in its way, and the only way you really get interest out of that is through the interface between evil and good, and even that isn't necessarily interesting. But I think generally my own GMing style has always been to offer nuance and to try and make the players cry because you are giving them moral dilemmas. And so implicitly, I personally find it more interesting. Some people don't. Gygax clearly didn't. Many decades after he designed the Drow, he was asked more than once about good Drow, and he said, I did everything I could to make these, the most awful, creatures you could think of. They worship this disgusting spider god. Who doesn't hate spiders? How in the world could you think they were ever, good or interesting people? And he finally acquiesced and said, okay, maybe 1% of Drow are good.
Well, they were given a good god, right? They were given like yeah.
Yeah, Ellis Trey or something like that. That's in Drow of the Underdark. So theoretically, it came from Greenwood in his 91 book. Maybe it was in the novels before that. I don't have quite as good of a handle on what was in the novels because Bob Salvatore's novels were the couple of years before that. But you certainly needed an idea like that when you have Drist running around, saying, oh, woe is me, I'm a Drow, but I'm trying to be good.
Yeah, there's definitely something lost. While I also tend to lean on the side of nuance, there is something to be gained by having clear cut, like good and evil. And this is a topic that's come up multiple times on the show now on the pod. But when you have the good elves and like their foil being the dark elves and like this sort of dichotomy, it does make it a little cleaner to have sort of like a clear villain. But yeah, no, I also agree in general. Nuance, at least modern times, nuance definitely seems to be the push of things.
It's certainly easier to run as a DM, which is not to excuse it. But I think sometimes from a game standpoint, you think, well, if you just have these bad guys and they're the bad guys, it's like Indiana Jones and his Nazis. It's like, you don't have to do as much explanation or character building or depth, or, you can just direct the players towards a big glowing arrow that says, kill these guys and you win.
I think it's not surprising that the creators who have done the best job of really considering and representing the nuance of potentially good dark elves or potentially bad dark elves are the novelists. So Bob Salvatore, his first series of books about Drist himself, the Homeland trilogy, I think it was, they're kind of fascinating in the way that he represents this violent, cruel society in a way that I don't think we'd ever gone out of the role-playing modules. And you could see, hey, I can see, you have these basic Hunger Games going on throughout the young lives of all of these elves. I can kind of see why that's interesting and fascinating and creates a good story. And then Elaine Cunningham came along later on. She's one of the few other people who's written extensively about Dark Elves. And she said, hey, what if I actually wrote this story about someone who wasn't necessarily good, trying to rise up in society, and she'll need to escape on her own, but, maybe everyone's evil, and that can be an interesting story. And I think novelists, because they can, talk about the internal lives of characters, might have had more success in that. And also is how, as we as role players have really seen how these ideas can be made real and concrete.
Well, this leads me into kind of for the last part of our show. I like to bring in some of the DM aspects, because we have a lot of people who listen to the podcast who say they're new DMs or looking for DM advice, dungeon master advice. And, one of the challenges that I think exists in using the Drow in a game is, we mentioned before, if you're going to go off this matriarchal society and this society of assassins and politics and plot, it feels like you almost have to be an insane genius yourself to write a good story for that. I didn't know if you had any advice on that, Shannon, or insight or thoughts on how people could run a good game with the Drow as central villains.
I think the easiest way is probably figure out 2 or 3 factions. Doesn't have to be a lot. Figure out what their goals are, and then figure out what plots they might do to advance those goals. So I could see, sitting down and saying, okay, I have this city of Drow that I'm going to write about. I'm going to care about 3 of the houses. Write their names. Okay, what is the goal of each of these houses? You look back to Descent. One of the houses had the goal, try and raise up the Elder Elemental God as the new deity of the Drow so that I can become High Priestess of the entire race. Another one had keep an eye on those people because we don't trust them and we know what they're wanting. We want to know what they're going to do. Another may have had, stay in control of the matriarchy of the cult of Loth itself so that, we retain the power we already have. So 3 houses, 3 goals. Then you just write down a few, what do they do? What specific concrete things do they do to advance this? In the case of the G&D again, Clavdra, she was the main Drow that we saw in there. She decided to go out and get the giants all riled up and get them attacking the lands of men with the idea of expanding the religion of her god to those lands. So that's a pretty big one, but it's a specific plot that you could see. You could come up with other plots that she might come up with, like gain an item of power related to the Elder Elemental God. He was apparently imprisoned somewhere, so you could say try and free him. Write out plots for each of those. And so suddenly, you've got 9 story ideas, not a lot. Present one in an adventure, present another in an adventure, and then present an adventure where those 2 come into conflict with each other. And suddenly maybe you'd look like that mad genius just because you thought about these couple of things and the players can't see exactly what they are. They can only see, kind of the 3rd level repercussions. They don't know what the goal is. They don't necessarily know what the plot is. They see how it's being enacted in the world. And so you have these secret things. They're not that big, but they look kind of big to the players. They look as mysterious as the Drow and Giant plots did to players back in 78.
Thank you for that. That's excellent advice on a lot of levels, not just for the Drow, but really for any villains or plots that new DMs or even old DMs want to come up with. That's a really, really good way to go about it.
Relating back to, and just to shine a little bit of light on someone who's contributing to the lore, which I've loved when we're doing these sorts of deep dives, finding oftentimes in old Dragon magazine articles, ecology descriptions that are written from the point of view of wizard scientists or just people that are living in the world and like they're discovering and you're kind of discovering with them as they tell the tale of what happened. And I wasn't able to find an official one of these ecology articles for the Drow, but I did stumble across an article by the Black Feather Adventuring Company, which was written from the point of view of a university scientist who enslaves himself, has himself sold as a slave to the Drow of a northern tribe of Drow, and then spends 6 years studying their behavior and whatnot. And he has a little bit that he threw in there about a birthday celebration that they do using a fungus pastry using phosphorescent icing. And they call them glow cakes. And it was just like a detail, which rang out to me and I absolutely loved. Because now every time I think of Drow, I think of them like having little fungus birthday cake celebration. So if anyone wants to Google this Black Feathered Adventuring Company, Ecology of the Drow, I definitely recommend it. It was a nice sort of step into the world from the point of view of someone, within it.
I have a very important question. What was his get out of Dodge plan?
Oh yeah, no. So it ends with him. The very end of the treatise is him saying in it that he's sending this message back to the university with plans of escaping the next couple days, because he sees people are starting to become aware that he knows their language and he's monitoring their behavior. So he's finally, after 6 years, been found out, and now he's like sending his information back to the university, hoping to get out, and that's the last communique. So I don't know, it's nice. It's a nice little bit of world building. Yeah.
And there is something I did want to give Shannon a chance to expand on, because Shannon, you sent me before the show some things about the Drow. And one thing you said is you wanted to say why the Fiend Folio, which is, I think, the first detailed publishing of the Drow where they appear in full stats. And I think also I know we've covered it before. It's where the Flumph come from. But you wanted to say why the Fiend Folio is the coolest monster manual ever. And I absolutely want to hear that.
Yeah, it's also where the Slad come from, who I believe you've covered recently.
Yes.
Well, the monster manual, when it came out, the original monster manual, it's a nice book of mostly mythological monsters. You do have a few original creations for D&D, like the Beholder, probably the Rust monsters, and there are a few others like that. The Fiend Folio is something almost totally different. It's entirely newly created stuff. And some of it didn't work out very well. And at the time, it was hated. In the 80s, people just said, that's that book of junk, it's got all of these ridiculous monsters. But it turns out that it has all of these deeply creative things that have become core parts of the lore. And I think the Flumph are a great example, because they were certainly one of the couple of monsters in there who were the most, mocked and derided when it came out. And now, it's one of the most hilarious repeating jokes in Order of the Stick. You decided that you needed to do a podcast about them. I hear people talking, humorously every once in a while about doing Flumph source books. So one of the reasons is that it's just this great source of creativity that I think over time has become more and more interesting, to the point in, 1981, people didn't love it that much. But by the end of second edition, they had a Fiend Folio appendix for the Monstrous Compendium, and they put out a Fiend Folio for third edition, showing really how it had changed around in the minds of people because of that creativity, and things like the Flumph and the Slad and Drow and Loth were in there because they had come out after the Monster Manual in official books. The other reason that I really love the Fiend Folio is because it's a British book. And so they all originally appeared in a column in White Dwarf magazine. They didn't all appear, but many of them originated there. Don Turnbull collected a lot more monsters from the British public. And so this was really the first major inclusion of material from kind of outside the Great Lakes region in a TSR product. And some of that has also resulted in some, great connections, like Charles Strauss, who is a very well-known science fiction writer now. A couple of his monsters are in there, and they're pretty notable monsters. The Githyanki, the Gither's Eye, those were Strauss.
Which are also actually originally taken from George R. Martin in an odd bit of trivia. He wrote a series of sci-fi long before Song of Ice and Fire, where he introduced the Gith as this enslaved race of psychic warriors, and then Charles Strauss developed them very, very differently for the Fiend Folio. But lots of trivia to the Fiend Folio.
Yeah, it's full of trivia, and that's why, as a historian, love it too. The fact that I can say, oh yeah, Charles Strauss is in here, and these monsters came from George R. R. Martin. But monsters in general are great for sources. The Displacer Beast, which were one of Gygax's, of course, came from a different science fiction novel originally, and so you find that scattered throughout. So that's why I think the Fiend Folio is great. It's just got all of this great material that I think has not just aged well, but it has brought the book from being, derided to loved and looked at as a source of, great material. I mean, the caryatid columns are one of the things in there. And I think you wouldn't have looked at them twice at the time. They were a typical trap monster like mimics and stuff. But now you're just like, wow, that's kind of evocative and makes me think of the, golden age of D&D.
And I think we have time before we end for one or two questions from the chat, if there's anything, Morgan.
We've pretty much caught up with everything that was being commented on earlier.
Well, in that case, the last thing I wanted to say is I do want to reiterate that these books are a lot of fun, the Designers and Dragons series, and you can pick them up still in print, I think, Shannon, correct? Or I know you can get PDFs still.
Yeah, they're still easily available in print. I know at least one of the books has technically gone out of print, but you look at Amazon and it's still there for about new price.
Okay.
But it's a time to get them because I know at least one has dropped out of print. The others are going to soon. I don't know quite when we're going to be reprinting them because there's the question of what do we do to update these? And I think that's going to be a bigger question. I'm going to finish these other new books first, the Lost Histories and the Tins, and then approach that particular problem.
And you also have a new Patreon you've started for to support these books. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's easy to find. It's patreon.com/designersanddragons, all spelled out. My main goal on these is to write new company histories. That's what the heart of the books are. It's where I wrote the Writer Fantasy Creations. It's where Reston Publishing is going to go out this month. And my goal is do one of these a month. I've just put myself in a position where I've got at least a day a week for writing this type of stuff, and hopefully in the near future more. And any of the company histories that are eventually going to become new books, they're going to be on that Patreon first, at least one a month.
Awesome. And is there anything else that that you want us to give a shout out to right now?
The other big thing that I'm working on right now is a group of histories for TSR themselves. When D&D Classics came out, they brought me on to write histories of the individual products as they came out. I split time with one other creator. He was doing the later books. I was doing the earlier books. And so I wrote all of these histories, hundreds of them, for the D&D Classics website, which is now DM's Guild, for individual products. And I made sure I retained rights for them so I could turn them into books eventually. It was the only thing that kept me writing 2 to 3 of these a week for years on end. And I've started making these into books now. And my top guess right now is that we're going to start maybe with 2 or 3 books, which are going to cover OD&D, AD&D First Edition, and Basic D&D. Maybe a 3rd book covering the other classic games like Gamma World, Star Frontiers, and such, which were in the same era.
Gamma World, awesome.
Yeah, so that's one of the other big things I'm working on right now. It's actually much more developed than the Lost Histories and the Tins because I have all of these histories that I've written already. Just some of them aren't quite in the right shape for publication. When I was doing them for online, sometimes they had to be very brief. But I'm calling that my TSR Codex right now. And it's something that's getting very active development. Before I sat down for this yesterday, I went through, revised, expanded my histories for the 3 giant modules and the 3 descent modules, so I could have it all clearly in my head, remember all of the lore. Those came out to about 8,000 words between those 6 books with lots of great history on how they came to be. So that's the sort of thing that I'm working on right now for the TSR Codex.
Well, I'm going to have to get a bigger bookshelf. Well, I think we can end with one fun question from the chat. We'll throw it to everybody here, and that is Black Mamba asked, you see a drow, an evil drow, coming towards you. What do you do? We'll throw it to Kayvon.
Coming towards me, get outside in the sunshine. Stay in the light. Stay in the light always.
Yeah. Question: are we underground or are we above ground? Is like where are we when we run into this drow?
We're gonna say Kayvon's taking Kayvon got outside and slammed the door, so we're all stuck underground.
Yeah. You guys are in the cave.
Yeah, I think the right answer is run.
Run. Shannon's running. Morgan, for you?
I mean, yeah, it's shoot first, ask questions later. Run while shooting. I don't know.
I'm going to try to put on my best female Drow impersonation.
Well, yeah. If you have a disguised self, you can just get back over there.
Get over there.
It's not time for break yet.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Shannon, for being on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I believe our next episode will be in June. We're still figuring out what we're covering. But you can keep an eye on our Twitter and our Facebook to see what's coming up next. So one thing I can say to everybody that's being worked on right now, and if you go to our Patreon, any money you put towards that helps support these projects. We are currently working on modules to release that are based on our Bestiary episodes, ideas that have come up from the Bestiary episodes. Our first one, the Owlbears, is almost done. And it is a fun adventure that starts in a race gone wrong when owlbears join the race, and ends with a sort of a mystery involving the owlbears that you get to solve. Hope to be able to share more news about that soon. They are going. The projects are steaming along. So, yes.
Excellent. So thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us today. It was a blast to have you. And huzzah for managing to snag the Drow slot.
As I said, shocked someone hadn't taken it yet.
Yes. I think we were actually fending off, we had several people that wanted it, and we were like, no. But we're holding that one back for a little bit. Okay, well, I think that's it for today. So thank you so much for watching, and we will be back soon with another monster for our Bestiary episode. Take care, everyone. See you later.